All right, so we're going to do a little story here with our volunteers, Malika and Sarah. And Malika and Sarah have been like best friends forever. All right, forever and ever and ever. And one day, Malika calls her friend Sarah and says, "Guess what? I'm expecting a baby." And Sarah says, "Oh my gosh, you too? So am I." Now, mind you, they are not women, all right? There's no women, there's no men, and they've made these babies asexually without the help of anyone else, just themselves, by themselves, making their own child. So they're all excited, they're gonna both have a child, and they tell their family, and everybody's really, really, really excited. So a few months pass by, and Sarah gets a call from Malika, and Malika's like, "Guess what, I'm in the hospital, and I'm about to give birth." And Sarah's like, "No way, so am I. I'm in the hospital also." And so shortly afterwards, Sarah gives a call to Malika because she had just given birth. And in fact, when the baby came out, the doctor walked up to her and is holding the baby and says, "Congratulations, you have a beautiful boy, Squiddy." And Sarah's all excited about that. And Malika is like, "Oh my gosh, you have a boy Squiddy? I just gave birth to a girl Squiddy." And they're Squiddies, everybody's excited. It's not like a shock that they've had Squiddies. And what the Squiddies are is they're about basketball size. They have tentacles. And they have a bunch of eyes. There's a bunch of eyes. There we go. There's their little eyes. And they have big wings. Big, beautiful wings, except the markers that was running out here. Big, big, beautiful wings. And so they look a little different than their parents, right? Than Malika and Sarah. They look a little bit different. And, you would expect them to be shocked, but they aren't. They're excited. Everybody's excited. The whole family is like, "This is wonderful." Sarah, she's got a boy Squiddy, and Malika, she's got a girl Squiddy, and this is wonderful. So the family has set up a beautiful, beautiful aviary cage in each house, right? Each family has. So they go home, and Sarah goes home, and she takes her Squiddy out of the little pet carrier kind of thing, and puts the Squiddy in the cage, and Squiddy starts flying around in the cage. And Malika goes and takes her little girl Squiddy home, and girl Squiddy's flying around the cage, and it's real easy to take care of them. Just change the newspaper at the bottom of the cage, give them some food, give them some water. Very easy to take care of. And they got brains like the size of walnuts, so it's not like you have to send them to school or anything. You just leave them in a cage to fly around all day. So years pass, and then one day Sarah calls up her friend Malika and says, "My Squiddy, he's kind of getting a little, a little uptight, a little upset in the cage. I think it's time. I think it's time that he wants to mate." So Malika brings her girl Squiddy over. They put the girl Squiddy in the cage. The Squiddies start flying around like crazy, mating in midair, like bald eagles. And then a few months pass, and one day Sarah is awoken by the sound of a little baby crying. She goes down at the bottom of the cage as her grandchild with 10 fingers and 10 toes. Beautiful, perfect baby. And she calls up Malika and says, "Guess what? We have a grandchild." And so Malika comes over, they look at it, the whole family comes over to see the grandchild. And then basically the two of them raise the grandchild because, Squiddy isn't going to be very effective at raising a grandchild that, wants to maybe play with puzzles and go to school and do math problems and things like that. Squiddy can't do any of that. So Malika and Sarah have to raise their grandchild. Now, this is strange because we don't do this, okay? We're humans, and we don't do this different generation. One generation looking like a Squiddy, and one generation looking like a human. We don't do that. We're kind of boring. Humans have the same looking individual generation after generation. And that is because each generation is diploid, meaning 2 sets of DNA. Okay? So you have 10 fingers and 10 toes here, 10 fingers and 10 toes here. And each generation produces eggs and sperm, by meiosis, because eggs and sperm are haploid. Put that word haploid right over here. And they combine together to make diploid. So each generation does that. That is very different from what plants do. Plants do like the story that we just talked about, okay? Plants do one generation squiddy and one generation that looks very different, okay? One generation, the next generation, back and forth, back and forth. And the two generations, one generation is called the sporophyte generation, and that's the diploid one. That's basically Sarah and Malika, okay? The next generation is called the gametophyte generation. And that's haploid, half the amount of DNA. So this is why they look very different. Okay, and this would be like the squiddies. Because it's only got half the amount of DNA that sporophyte generation has. Now the sporophyte generation makes spores that are haploid. Okay, so some meiosis has to occur because we're halving the amount of DNA. Those will grow into gametophytes. The gametophytes, there are girls, and the girls have a little structure called the archegonia, where she will make eggs. And the boy gametophytes have a little structure called the antheridia, where he will make sperm. So they make the eggs and sperm, and again, they're haploid. So it's made by mitosis because you're going haploid to haploid. And they combine together to make the sporophyte generation. Two very different generations. And this is called, oops, if I could find an expo pen that actually wants to write for me, alternation of generations. Each generation looks different. And in fact, when you look outside and you look at a pine tree, for instance, you're actually looking at one generation. The other generation looks totally, completely different. Okay? People don't realize that. They just assume one pine tree gives birth to another pine tree that looks exactly like the other pine tree. Not at all the case. Not at all the case. So this alternation of generations is very interesting. I mean, it makes humans and animals look quite boring with our plain diploid generations. They should have make a good Star Trek movie involving something like this alternation of generations. They probably already have somewhere down the line. So this is a very exciting, different way that plants have in terms of reproducing, going back and forth from haploid to diploid, back and forth, back and forth. And, it works for them. So, thank you.